past, which is what we talked about last week. And but the narrative slows down, right? This is common in ancient stories. The example I usually give is the Odyssey, if you've ever read it. The Odyssey is pretty simple. Odysseus is a king, a Greek king. He fought in the Trojan War, and he's gone for years, and it's his journey back home to see his wife and kids. And his wife's trying to hold down the fort. All these people think Odysseus is dead. The throne is empty. And you get like halfway into the book, and he lands on the island. He's home. But you're only halfway through the story, and all of a sudden the narrative just comes to a screeching halt. It's terrible to read when you get to this part. All the cool stuff happens in the first half, right? Cyclops and the remember they tie him to the mast of the ship, and they go whatever the women are called there, all this cool stuff. And then you get halfway through the book, and it just slows down to a crawl. And the reason the ancients told stories that way is because it's so annoying. It creates in your heart like, Odysseus, just go get your throne back. And what we're doing here is, Jacob, just go talk to your brother, right? Pick up your phone and just call him, right? And so the story really, really slows down for us, and it is effective. And along the way, there are various things that happen. Well, when my brother and I were kids, I've told you we fought all the time, and if we weren't fighting, Mom and Dad assumed that we were sick. And one day, Mom and Dad, they just had enough. I don't know what we did, but we just went at it again. And I remember, my dad wasn't very physical, but he was strong enough that if he had to be physical with us, I remember him just grabbing us and just, boom, just holding us out. I mean, this is enough, right? This is enough. I don't know what else to do with you boys, right? We have tried everything. And it just so happened that day we were supposed to go karate. And we would do karate twice a week for 2 hours. We did the tournaments, all this sort of stuff. Loved karate. And so Dad takes us to karate. And the house that we did karate was actually a house my dad grew up in. He had his name carved. You talk about a small town, right? You get more small town than that. And he had carved his initials under the steps and all this. So Dad loved going over there for nostalgic reasons. He comes in, it was in the basement. He comes in, he says, Jerry, who was the guy that led it all, he said, these two boys won't stop fighting. I'm going to drop them off, and they're going to start fighting. Do not let them stop until I come by to pick them up. And they said, okay. So it was split up like in two halves, and we would all do our katas and stuff. What he did was he said, okay, you two have this half all by yourself. Everyone else, we're all going to squeeze in over here. And we're not going to spar, not going to do anything. You're going to do katas and stuff. These two boys are going to fight. And Jerry's true to his word. He did everything my dad had asked. Now, the first 5 or 10 minutes, it was bliss, because we never fought each other in karate because the emotion was too strong. But on this day, that rule didn't exist. And the first 5 or 10 minutes, man, we just went at it, But, after you fight for so long, you start to get tired. It's like anything else. Painting your house, right, you're going to get tired. Punching as hard as you can, right? Now, Jerry will make sure, don't just go in there and start throwing down. Technique was important. This was karate still. And he had someone else take over class, and he just watched us for 2 hours. Oh. And after a while, we just, we're doing this, and he said, no, you're not stopping. Go. And for 2 hours, we fought. I kid you, for 2 hours. And by the time Dad came to pick us up, we were hugging each other, right? Just to stand up. We had it was like Mike Tyson and Evander Holyfield minus the biting off the ear part, right? We're just like this, So that's just for 2 hours. Jacob is fighting all night, which may help explain as I read the story. Like, well, I've been there, just fighting and fighting and fighting and fighting. And so Jacob is wrestling here. Now, we need to know here that this is one of those texts that's weird. All right, we come to this and you're thinking, oh, okay, this sounds really important, but what in the world is actually going on? And I think there'll be a few things we can pick up here. Let's start in verse 22. Then the same night he arose and went to his 2 wives and his 2 female servants. Remember, those are the 4 women who bore him his 13 children. His 11 children, of course, Benjamin hasn't been born yet. It leaves out Dinah, and that's because that story is going to pick up in a few chapters. and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. He took them and sent them across the stream and everything else that he had. Just pause there. You remember that Jacob's original plan is to divide everything, right? And so he's got half his family possessions over here, the other half over here. And the thinking is that when Esau attacks, he's going to pick one or the other, which means at the very least Jacob will be able to save half. That's a pretty pessimistic way of doing things, but it's a very practical way of doing things, right? Do you want to lose everything, or are you willing just to lose some? Of course, you're thinking, why don't he split everything into like 1%, right? Just have 100 groups, okay? You know, that's an option, but he splits everything into twos. So now he changes his plan. He goes from splitting them into twos to uniting them yet again. So what he's doing is he is traveling south, which means Esau is coming from the south. He sends his family up north. So at the very least, Esau has to go through Jacob. Now remember, Esau's got 400 dudes. He's got a militia with him. So he's going to be able to handle Jacob. But at the very least, he's given his family a head start. Now they're going to move slower than a militia. But at least they have a head start. And you sort of wonder, well, is Laban coming from the north? Right? You know, I mean, he's in a difficult situation. The word Jabbok there means emptying or pouring out. And some have suggested, I've seen in some research, it means wrestling, to wrestle. And that obviously is to pick up on the narrative of him wrestling with the man. And just in English, I wasn't able to really pick up on this much. The word sounds like the word Jacob, Jabbok, Jacob. I don't know if there's anything to that or not, but because Jacob is Jacob, and so this would be Yabak or something like that in Hebrew. I have to look it up, have it in front of me again. But with that, we pick up in verse 24. And Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until the breaking of the day. Here it is, right? We get right into it. So the family leave. Jacob goes to war. Now, that setting is important because the question is, who is the man? Right? A couple of things. First of all, here is Jacob for the first time where he is really alone. He was alone somewhat when he was going north to find a wife. God intervened then at Bethel. Here he's alone going south, as if he doesn't have a family again. Now this is a great, if this were Hollywood, you could see the camera, right? Here's Jacob with the gun to his side, waiting for Esau to come, right? There he was, all alone, him to save the nation that he loves, or whatever it is, right? I mean, it's like every action movie, okay? And he did it all for 4 women. You know, that's his version of it, okay? And I never put that together. This did remind me of a Lord of the Rings quote. So give this to Kent, Jennifer. Pippin says in the movie, right before the big battle in Return of the King, he says, I don't want to go into a battle. He's got the British voice. But waiting on the edge of one I can't escape is even worse. And that's Jacob. He knows Esau's going to be here. And in many ways, he thinks this is his last night. He sends them up north. He's going to get some sleep. Esau's going to be here in the morning. And before he can go to sleep, he starts the wrestle. Now, you know nothing else about the story, okay? Who's the man? Verse 24 says it's a man. The Hebrew word is ish. Just means man. There's 2 words for man in Hebrew. Adam, Adam, or ish. Ish is the generic word for man. Just means man. Don't mean nothing else. Man. So you know nothing else about the story. Who's the man? It's Esau. Or Laban, maybe, but Esau. The whole story's been about Esau's coming to get you. He's afraid of Esau. And all we know is that Jacob is wrestling with the man. If you're Jacob, who do you assume this man is? Esau. And so you can see why Jacob isn't going to give up until he is dead. Because this is really about survival, not just for him, but about his family. I really do think that the reader is to assume this is Esau. And I think we are to assume Jacob thinks this is Esau. I could be wrong on that, and people would say otherwise. That's fine. But if you just read the narrative, sometimes we struggle to read the Bible with fresh eyes and fresh ears because we're familiar with the story. And that really holds us back. But if you just read it for the first time again, you know no other details. All you know, he's wrestling with a dude in the middle of the night. Sounds like Esau, the thing he has feared the most. So the question then is, who is this man? We've already said that the word means man. I bet your translation says man, because that is a literal translation. And your options are Laban, Esau, Isaac, if you just limit it to that interpretation. So it could be Isaac saying, dude, what are you doing? Right? It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. Laban does make sense, but Laban catches up with them later. So it can't be him. But Esau, I do think, is a very real possibility. But with that said, although the word man means man, it also seems to suggest in Genesis and other parts of the Bible, but particularly Genesis, it can in rare instance mean the appearance of a man. Let me give you two examples, and they are related to each other. Genesis 18:2, Abraham lifts up his eyes and looks, he sees three men. Ish. That's what it means. Three men. Three men standing before him. When he saw them, he ran over to the tent, meet them, bow down to the earth. And then what he does is in ancient Near Eastern culture, hospitality is number one. You go to Middle Eastern culture now, hospitality is number one deal, right? When we went to Trinidad, Man and I were overwhelmed by their hospitality. It was incredible. And at times it's annoying. We're fine. Just let me go to sleep, okay? You know, and it's like, well, you got to try. This is a delicacy here, right? And we got so sick of delicacies. We loved it all. When we landed back in the United States, we went to the first fast food restaurant. Speaking of healthy food, Jennifer, we both ate a Whopper. As a Burger King's first place we came to, a Whopper. My little wife, right, ate a Whopper. Not a Whopper Jr., what she usually gets, a Whopper. Right? She didn't pick off eating the food like she usually does. But here, I don't know how we got on that. Here are three men. Three men. And Abraham and Sarah show them hospitality. They fix food and all this sort of stuff, give them a place to stay. Now, we know who these three men are. Two go to Sodom. And here it says, the two angels came to Sodom in the evening. They call Lot, where are the men? So we begin with men, because they look like men, they act like men, they talk like men. And then later, the Sodomites think they're men. And the word is ish. But we know in the narrative they're actual angels. Remember, angels in the Bible don't have wings. They look like men. And we know that of the three figures, two of them are angels, one of them is God himself. And we can go back to our study of Genesis 18 and we explore that in some detail. So, just because it says a man came doesn't always mean it's exclusively a man. I think I can prove this furthermore. So, not only is it a man, but it's not merely a man at the same time. Go down to verse 30 of this chapter. Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, which saying, I have seen God face to face. Now, he hasn't, right? I thought it was a man. But in the text, it's telling you it's more than a man. He's seen God himself. Even more than that, well, actually the word here, Elohim, is important. He saw Elohim. In fact, the word Peniel, that E-L, means God. It's Elohim. So, Elijah, for example. Beth-El. Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. My God. So the I is my. So, my Elohim, my Elohim. So he's saying, he calls this place the face of God. Now that word Elohim, it means God. It's actually plural, so it's God's. If you want to be technical, but not in the Jewish sense. It wouldn't be that when talking about Yahweh. Although Elohim does mean God, it can mean any spiritual being. Let me prove this to you. I was actually talking to Chris about this earlier. Psalm 8:5. Yet you have made him a little lower than, this is ESV, the heavenly beings. You all know what your Bible probably says? Angels. But it's not the Hebrew word for angels. It's the Hebrew word Elohim. So in Psalm 5, what is man that you are mindful of and all that? You have made man a little lower than the Elohim. Now, clearly it's not talking about the Elohim, God. Big G, God. But it's an ancient Near Eastern way of saying divine beings of some sort. Angels is a perfectly fine translation. Heavenly beings is probably the most wooden, literal one that you can get the ESV gives us. But here you see that the word Elohim doesn't always mean big G God. So we see in verse 24, he's wrestling with Ish, a man. We see in verse 30 that he describes him as Elohim, God, or divine being. So who is he wrestling with? Well, let's make this even more complicated. Hebrews 12 says, this is Jacob. In Jacob's manhood, he strove with Elohim, God. Now, that's a perfectly fine translation, God, because it reflects the narrative of Genesis 32. But then it says, he strove with the angel. Well, which is it? Right? This is why you interpret the Bible with the Bible. In Hebrew poetry, they love parallelism, where you say the same thing in two different ways. And so the way you do that is you use synonyms. We do this all the time, even when we don't think about it. So he strove with Elohim, he strove with Malach, angels. Or with the angel, rather. Because they are one and the same. So, who is this man, right? I think this is the angel of the Lord who appears as a man, which is typical of the angel of the Lord. This is who I think it is. I could be wrong. Because he is associated with the divine. He had a face of God, right? He went face to face with God, both literally in that face to face and mano a mano, if you will. And this being is described as the angel. So I think. Do you have the Message version though?
I don't have it.
It says Psalms 8:5.
Oh yeah, this would be fun.
Yet we so narrowly miss being gods, fraught with Eden's dawn light.
So the word gods,
It's lowercase.
yeah, the most wooden. Now again, Elohim, to the American reader, Elohim is a complicated word. To the Hebrew, it's not, because it's rich in meaning. So it means gods. It's plural. The im is plural. It's like an S. In Hebrew, it's just plural. So it's literally gods. But in Hebrew, they don't believe in gods. They believe in God. So to them, Elohim means God, unless they're talking about the other nations. So they would use the same word. The context tells you if it's God or gods. So you could say, God made them, man, lower than the gods. But dear American reader, is that what you want your Bible to say? Much in the same way, you King James readers, this will get me crucified. Do you really want your Bible to say there are unicorns? No.
Yeah, make the honor.
They were jumping on the rainbow. But no, I mean, it's just an issue of translation, and that when you translate, you have to be sensitive to how the reader interprets it. So gods, although would be a wooden translation, it's not a helpful translation. So that's one of those few instances that the Message takes it too literally, because it's just not good. It's not good.
Mythology.
You know, there's another verse there that says that no man has seen God and lived.
We're going to come to that.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. Someone's reading ahead.
What are you thinking?
Well, you're right, because we mentioned face to face with God, and that's going to come with you can't do that. With that said, Jacob is wrestling, I think, with the angel of God, the angel of the Lord. That word wrestle, it's only used here in Genesis 32, in two places. You won't find anywhere else in the Bible. It may be a play on words. Jacob, Yabek, Jabek, and wrestle is vak. It's very similar, and that's typical of Hebrew writing. All right, verse 25, that's enough of that. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he touched his hip socket. Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. And he said, "Let me go, for the day has broken." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." This again is where things get complicated. If the man is the angel of the Lord, then how is it that he did not prevail against Jacob? Well, what people do is to say, well, it can't be the angel of the Lord because he ain't scared of Jacob. No, obviously. Can I prove it to you from the text? When the angel of the Lord was done fighting, he finished it. Right? I mean, you ever, like every dad will play basketball with his little boy. He could, at any minute, dunk all over the kid. At any minute, he could end the game, right? You know, we don't have time for this story. So my daughter asked me to play chess someday. I never thought she'd ask me that. I love chess. I take chess too seriously. There's no one who wants to play chess, so I play it on my phone. But I love chess. Love it, okay? I used to be nationally ranked, went to all the tournaments. Love it. And my daughter learned to play chess by going to a friend's house, which, anyways. So I finally sat down to play chess with her. And the first thing I tell her about chess is I hold up a knight. I say, "What is this called?" She goes, "Oh, it's the horsey." I say, "No, never say that again. It's a knight."
Rook.
Yes, castle. No, rook. Rook, knight, bishop, king, queen, pawn. Get it right. Right? I don't want to hear this castle stuff. I don't want to hear this horsey stuff. I don't want to hear pointy hat stuff, right? Little piece stuff. I don't want to hear that. You're going to get it right. And so we're playing, and you know my daughter, she's the chatty one. And my wife is in the kitchen, listening to her, and she's like, "Gee, I didn't know it was going to be taken so seriously. Every time I move, you're like, 'Do you know why you made that move?' 'I don't know, Daddy. I just thought it looked pretty.'" She's like, "If you're going to play chess, you're going to play chess the right way, right?" So I did the dad thing. We did the first game. I beat her. Because I have a rule about chess. I'm not going to give you a win. Right? I take it very seriously. My son beat me a few years ago, first time. And I was really proud of him, but it really bothered me. I'm going to be honest with you, right? Because I'm running through my head like, man, I know what I did wrong. Anyways, so the second game, I beat her in 4 moves just to prove a point. Right? Scholars made. I just had to. Right? Had to. I did it to Elijah. Did it to Amanda. Amanda won't play anymore. Anyway, so I think the angel of the Lord is doing the same thing. He's wrestling. And then when the angel of the Lord's done wrestling, he ends it. He blocks the shot, puts him in checkmate. I'm going to dislocate your hip. That'll do it. Right? So I don't think we should say the angel of the Lord's like, "Man, I didn't know he was this strong." No, that's not at all. It's a way of emphasizing the narrative to make it better. And then he just ends it. Jacob didn't prevail against the divine being. He still lost in the end. But it is a strong way to say that Jacob would not surrender. And given the darkness, it's possible, again, he may be fighting Esau. And of course he wouldn't give up. He knows the story of Cain and Abel. He thinks Esau's coming to kill him. If you think someone's going to come kill you, do you care how long you've been fighting? No. You're going to keep fighting. And perhaps the dislocating of the hip is God's way of showing Jacob that Jacob is still standing because God has allowed him to still stand. This is an act of submission. It's an act of humility that Jacob has to learn. And despite the wound, Jacob refuses to give up there in verse 26. And he's, it's daytime. I'm not going to let go until you bless me. By this point, I think he knows who he is wrestling with. He's met this individual once or twice already, particularly at Bethel. Remember, at Bethel, he's going up and down the stairway. Now he is fighting him at night. And he wants a blessing. I find this interesting. Blessing is a major theme in Jacob's story. He took Esau's blessing, which is why he's in this mess. He stole the rest of his blessing from his father, who had poor eyesight. And now he's trying to get a blessing from God himself. It's interesting is he could deceive his way through 2 of those. He must submit his way through the 3rd. Yeah, Dan.
I think this whole thing here about this wrestling and all this, it was in a sense, it was a physical thing. He got his hip hurt, but this was a spiritual event for Jacob. Here he is wrestling. He was not going to give up because he really wanted that blessing.
Yeah.
And I don't think any other time in his life Jacob I don't ever get the idea that he really, truly, and sincerely desired the blessing like what he got here because he persevered.
Yes. So I think you're right that the blessing is the central story of Jacob. How can a rascal like him receive the blessing? Why would God give it to him? So that's exactly where I want us to go. So this is where we read to look at the idea of Elohim and angel. Let's read the entire verse 3 going into verse 4. Notice what the prophet does. In the womb, he took his brother by the heel. That's where he got the name Jacob. In his manhood, he tried to take God by the heel. He wrestled with him. So this is who Jacob is. Though he's soft compared to Esau, he's a fighter like Esau. And what he does is he uses deception as a means of fighting. He fights, he fights, he fights. This is why many scholars look at this story as the real turning point in the Jacob narrative. We could put it this way. This is when he gets converted, if you will. The Bethel narrative and the Jabbok narrative is where Jacob finally becomes the one, the promised one. Because so what you get in the story essentially is God promised Jacob he would be the promised son. He doesn't have to take anything. God will give it to him. But he has a personality where he's always having to fight to get it. And because he's not strong physically, he has to be strong mentally. It's the difference between Batman and the Joker. Batman's got the muscles, Joker has the brain. There's a reference for you. And so here he is, he's got to deceive his way through everything. Deceives his father, deceives his brother, deceives his father-in-law. And as a result, he's created a mess. Here, he's humbled while fighting. And he's humbled to the point that he is going to be given a blessing not because he's fighting, but because he surrendered. Once he gives up, he gets the blessing, which is what he wanted in the beginning. That's why he took Esau. This is why he took Isaac, the blessing from Isaac. And so the prophet comes and says that's who Jacob was. He was a man of war. He was a man of deception. In the womb, he became Jacob. Then he wrestled God. And as we'll see, God will change his name. Verse 27, he said to him, "What is your name?" He said, "Jacob." Then he said, "Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel. He hath striven with God and with men and hath prevailed." So, in the Bible, name changes are important. Not all of them, but particularly when God changes name. Abram to Abraham, Sarai to Sarah. How about Jedediah to Solomon? By the way, if you want the biblical reference, there it is. Solomon's original name was Jedediah. We talked about that. We went through 2 Samuel. Do with it whatever you want. Jacob means heel grabber, or the one who grabs the heel, deceiver, if you will. I always imagine that as someone who, when you walk by, you stick your foot out. I don't know why. That's the image that comes to mind. I don't know if we're supposed to think that or not. Israel, there's some debate about it, but you see the EL on Israel, Yisrael. Most agree it means God prevails, or he who strives with God. And that you see that in the text. And this serves as a type of transformation for Jacob. He is no longer one who has to supplant. He is no longer one who has to deceive. He is now the servant of God. So the Bible does this play on words. In the prophets in particularly, when Israel is being bad, he'll call them Jacob. When he's calling them back, he'll say, you're Israel. Or it just says, sometimes you're Jacob, sometimes you're Israel, right? Or, just remind you that you got two names here. And I really think this is a type of conversion for him. He's given a new name. Much in the New Testament that we get a new identity. We're new creatures. We get new names. Verse 29. Then Jacob asked him, "Please tell me your name." Horse master, to quote Gimli from Lord of the Rings. But he said, "Why is it that you ask my name?" And there he blessed him. So Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, saying, "For I have seen God face to face, yet my life has been delivered." It's funny. He's like, "Well, I gave you my name. What's yours?" And he's like, "Get over it. None of your business." We're not here to deal with me. We're here to deal with you. But the response is probably that Jacob already knows the answer to the question he's asking, because he confesses in the next verse he was facing God. He knows. Now remember that the name, we don't have time for all. We've done it way back, and I've forgotten half of it. I'm sure we've all forgotten it. The name is a way of speaking of God's presence. Again, we can't chase that rabbit. But eventually God will reveal his name, not here, but at the burning bush. Who shall I say sent me? I am. Or to be sent you. The essence of existence. The ontological one, if you will. The being of being is my name. So you're not going to get the name here. Well, as we said, Peniel means face of God. The Bible, this is what Don's point earlier, the Bible emphasizes that man cannot stand in the presence of God and survive. If you remember what Isaiah did, woe is me, I'm a man of unclean lips, and I hang out with people with unclean lips. Of course, that's not the only thing unclean about Isaiah. He understands that if I'm standing here, I'm either dead or about to be real soon. I can't survive this. Let me give you a few verses. Exodus 19:21. Lord said to Moses, go down and warn the people, lest they break through the Lord and to look, and many of them perish. Remember that when God showed up at Sinai, Moses and the others that went with him, they were consecrated to go. Everyone else had to stay down because they couldn't be in the presence of God and survive. You remember Moses' request, I want to see you, because Jacob got to see him. God's response is, you can't. So he had to hide in the rock. And through the rock, he could be in the presence of God. And as a result, he reflects the Shekinah glory of God. Well, that's why Paul will later say, Jesus is the rock. And that hidden in Christ, we see God face to face. Judges 6, Gideon perceived that he was the angel of the Lord. And Gideon said, alas, O Lord God. Notice, Elohim Yahweh. So it should be, oh God, Lord, in our English. But we don't talk like that. So instead of translating Yahweh as Lord, we translate it as God so it fits English. That's why this is capitalized. Elohim Yahweh. So there's fun with that word again. For now I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face. The Lord said to him, peace be to you. Do not fear, you will not die. He's afraid of seeing the angel of the Lord, whom he identifies as Yahweh. Well, is it the angel of the Lord? Is it Yahweh? Yes. Right? Jews struggle with this. It's the two Elohim sort of thing going on, if you want to get into Second Temple Judaism. Christians is like, dude, you want me to tell you how it makes sense? He eventually put on flesh and hung out with us. Okay? One more, Deuteronomy 4. Moeller has a great sermon on this text here. For ask now the days that are past, which were before you, since the day that God created man on the earth, and ask them one in the heavens or the other, whether such a great thing has ever happened or was ever heard of. Here it is. Did any people ever hear the voice of God speaking out of the midst of the fire as you heard it and still lived? This is to hear the voice of God, let alone see the face of God. Has anyone ever heard him and survived? Well, verse 31, the sun rose up upon him as he passed Peniel, limping because of his hip. This single verse makes it clear that Jacob did not experience a vision or a dream. This is the real deal. Now, I know some of us, we have dreams and we hurt ourselves, right? You know, we do that. But that's not this sort of thing. This was not a vision. This actually happened. And so long as he's limping, his 4 wives are going to come and say, something wrong, Jacob? You're going to say, first of all, that's not my name. Right? I changed my name. I've already filed it with the Social Security office. They'll change it officially in 12 years. But I got this limp because this is what God did, the angel of the Lord. Verse 32, therefore to this day the people of Israel do not eat the sinew of the thigh that is on the hip socket, because he touched the socket of Jacob's hip of the sinew of the thigh. Here's the thing, that is a law that is found nowhere in the law. Do we do this today? Ever been part of a Baptist church? Yeah. Do we have traditions? Yeah. I went and hung out with the kids. They've been down there since 5:30. Lane and I went door to door. We went back here, finished that from last week. Went over here to Carter Hill, a few houses, not very many. And then we hung out with the kids. I was wearing this, right? To go hang out with the kids because it's kind of warm outside, I took off my dress shirt. Why did I put my dress shirt back on for church tonight? I didn't want to put up with it. That's why, right? Well, any of y'all, I'm lucky enough I don't have to wear a suit coat all the time. But Irma Jean to come here and say, preacher, why are you wearing that t-shirt? Right? You know? Where's that in the Bible? It ain't. But we act like, and there's nothing wrong with that. I'm using that as an example. The Bible doesn't tell Jews you can't eat this part of meat. But because of the story, they decided not to. So what you have now is an editorial note, maybe by Moses. By the way, if you want to see this, you'll find this all over the Bible. Here's a good example. This is an editorial note in the middle of a narrative. You can take this out and the narrative doesn't change. And man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife to become one flesh. Now you read that, you're like, yeah, I know that's in the Bible. It doesn't fit the narrative. Because Adam and Eve don't have a father and mother. Right? It's an editorial note. You have a narrative and the writer is saying, by the way, this is why we do what we do. It goes all the way back to creation. Here, the writer is saying, by the way, this is why we do what we do. God dislocated Jacob's hip and he limped, and we just, by not eating that part, we are recognizing this part of the story. By the way, the phrase people of Israel is the first time this phrase is used. It literally means children of Israel. Your translation probably says children of Israel. And it makes sense now, doesn't it? He changed his name. You wouldn't have that phrase, the children of Israel, people of Israel, until Jacob becomes Israel. So remember this, that when you read your Old Testament, you're thinking, how come Israel are just so off? Look who they're named after. He's a rascal. They're just like their daddy, right? Well, ultimately, this narrative is the summary of the entire Jacob story. Jacob is promised to be the promised son of Isaac despite his birth order. And on the one hand, he's the promised son. On the other hand, he strives with everyone in his life to be made the promised one. All Jacob had to do was to accept the promise at the moment of his birth. He wrestled unnecessarily until God finally humbled him. And at that point, he was made the promised son. The blessings of man can be taken, but the blessing of God must be given. That's the difference between religion on the one hand and grace on the other. Religion says, I can do and I'll get. The gospel says, Christ has done, therefore he gives. It has to be received with a limp. Let me give you just real quickly three applications. We won't spend forever on this. Number one, fear God, not man. I suspect Jacob first assumed he was wrestling with Esau. By the end of the story, Esau has a limp and he's unable to wrestle Esau. But he's not afraid of him anymore. He's learning to fear God and not man. And once you wrestle with God face to face, you're not too afraid of your older brother, are you? Secondly, God wounds his sons for their good. I mentioned this at the Capitol today that Americans, Westerners, we associate ease with love, particularly divine love. If God doesn't give me an easy life, it's because he doesn't love me or he's not a loving God. You'll never find that in the Bible. Jacob was wounded. Jesus was crucified. Why do you think you and I are entitled to anything good? God does wound us, but always for our good. What's the old Martin Luther saying? They gave our Lord a crown of thorns. Why do we think we'll be given a bed of roses? I think he's right. But it isn't God allows suffering just because he wants to keep us on our toes. Rather, he wounds in order to bless, in order for our good. And here we have the humbling of Jacob, which is good for his family, and it's good for him. Thirdly, God is most strong when men are most weak. Jacob will now limp to meet with Esau, his brother. He now walks with a new confidence, for he knows the Lord is strong despite his handicap. And at the cross, we see God, the God-man in weakness. What we also see is the God-man in all of his glory and his strength. This is why Christianity turns everything on its head. In Christianity, you are strong when you are loud, and you are powerful, and you're muscular. You have the biggest army, you have the biggest crowd, the most followers. In Christianity, you can be the strongest when you're nailed to a tree. And we know Jesus is strongest because he allowed them to nail him to a tree. We know he's the strongest because he conquered death. We'll talk some about the conquering of death, Lord willing, Sunday morning. But even in his weakness, Christ was strong. That's why Paul can come later and say, when we are weak, we are strong, because God becomes our strength. Humility leads to exaltation. Pride leads to our fall. Just read the New Testament, it's all over the place. And Jacob learns that, like most of us, the hard way. Danny, Don, we miss anything? Yeah.
I got a question.
Mhm.
When, God told him to go back to his home, do you think he was trusting God because he wanted to get away from Laban? Because God had promised to protect him all the way down there. And then when he came down to the real show, he's not so confident. He starts giving away everything he owns.
It's all of the above. So the promise in chapter 28, I'll bring you back. Jacob does something interesting in, he goes up to Laban and he says, I'm ready to go home. I've worked for you 20 years, time for me to go home. And Laban says, what do I have to do to keep you? And suddenly Jacob says, I got an idea. If everything's up for grabs, give me the spotted speckled sheep. And we learn later it's because God had revealed to him to get that. Now, Jacob is claiming the promise, God's going to take me home. Then he claims the promise, I've got to wait for when God takes me home. Because he wants me to do this weird experiment, this genetic experiment. But then when he comes, he starts to leave, and he tells his wives, God told me it's time to leave. And that's when he told me about all this. So he leaves, but along the way, God reminds him multiple times, you're going to be fine. But all the while he's being told he's fine, he's like, am I going to be fine? No, like my wife earlier, right? It isn't until we're in the middle of the cornfield, she starts to panic. I'm about to have a baby. Of course, she was, but she didn't have a baby, right? Jacob, like us, does the same thing. We claim the promises, but then there's still enough doubt where we need to reaffirm them. Or as it's put in the New Testament, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief.
Amen.
That is a verse I have preached so many times because I don't understand it. And yet that's the point. That's the point. There's this room there. We just got to swim into that, figure it out. And I think that's where Jacob is. But here, he's not going to worry about Esau too much. As we'll find, he did a lot of worrying about Esau unnecessarily, like most of us. Anyways, anything else? Yeah, Dan?
I think it's very significant that Jacob was here by himself.
Yeah.
Mom and Daddy wasn't there. He didn't have Mama pulling for him or helping him trick anybody. His family was gone. His wife went on his back.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't scared to death of
Yeah.
Esau.
Yeah.
And he made this decision on his own.
Yeah.
And he made the right decision.
Yeah.
And I personally think that this is a change in Jacob, in his spirituality.
Yeah.
Because we always call him a deceiver and a trickster.
Yeah.
He's now a man of spiritual integrity,
Yeah.
in my opinion.
Yeah, you can't call him that deceiver anymore. God changed his name. Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right. One other thing to point out here, in Genesis in particular, God shows up at night to affirm a covenant. But he does it when men are sleeping. Adam goes to sleep and he gets a wife. Abraham goes to sleep, God walks through the severed carcasses. We've seen this several times. Jacob intends to sleep and he ends up fighting God. Adam and Abraham were willing to go to sleep. Jacob wasn't. And through the wrestling, he finally is humbled like his grandfather and his first father, Adam. It's amazing. The Bible's an incredible book. You just read it. It's an incredible, incredible book. Anything else? I'm going to go get me some mac and cheese. I love the Susan mac and cheese. My goodness.
You're hoping there is some.
I am. I'm a little nervous about it. All right. How about we